Welcome to the Circuit of Success Podcast.
The Circuit of Success Podcast.
With your host,
Brett Gilliland.
Brett Gilliland, Visionary Wealth Advisory.
The Circuit of Success Podcast. Let's start the show.
Well, Marc Bushala, thank you so much for being here. It's been an amazing time already. Would everybody agree? I agree. We're getting claps instead of booze.
That's a good start.
What I want to talk about today after the amazing tour we just had is what got you here, right? Because you don't just wind up and have a distillery and the last refuge. So let's go back to the backstory. What made you the man you are today?
Well, I got my start in the bourbon business with a brand called Angel's Envy, which was created by a group of partners, myself included, and the Henderson family. Lincoln Henderson was a celebrated master distiller, 40 years at Brown-Forman, and had retired and wanted to come out of retirement to have his own brand. So Wes Henderson, his son, and Lincoln were our production partners. And we spent some time educating ourselves about the whiskey space because my business partner and I knew nothing about the space. We knew we had a great talent to produce the liquid, but what should the brand be? Who are the consumers? All of that good stuff. We had another partner in the business, which was a celebrated advertising executive and worked for every major brand you could imagine. And he and I did the bourbon trail, like 4 or 5 different visits just to educate ourselves. And we kept hearing about the Angel's share, the amount of liquid that evaporates from a barrel each year. About 5% of the liquid evaporates. And I remember turning to Alex Boguski and saying, Angel's share would be a really cool name if we could trademark it. And he looked at me and he's like, that's not bad, kid. So the next day he comes back and said, well, Angel's share has been trademarked. It's not in use. But I was thinking the part of the liquid we kept should be called the Angel's Envy. I'm like, and that's why you get paid the big bucks. So he went away and came up with the shape of the bottle and the idea for, well, what the bottle we know today. And we launched in 2014, right when people started getting interested in bourbon again. Had a lot of wind in our back and some success, and we sold that business to Bacardi. So we launched in 2011 and sold it in late 2014. So it was a very short run. And said, that was amazing, let's do that again. So I immediately spent time thinking about what's the next thing I want to do in whiskey. And I had read that Bob Dylan wanted to launch his own whiskey. Actually, it wasn't an article. If you want to create a brand, you have to submit to the TTB the name and a design for a bottle. And if you're in the industry, you follow what's being filed for so you can see what your competitors are doing. So I said, Bob Dylan wants to launch a whiskey. I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. I'm like, I can't imagine that he wants to own anything. Or does he know anything about whiskey? And how is he going to do it? And who's he doing it with? So I hounded his manager until I got a call. And we discussed this, and he said, I have no idea how we're going to do this. Bob's always wanted to have a whiskey, and he likes the name Bootleg. So that's what we filed. And I said, would you be open to some thoughts on what this could be and how it could look and names and stuff? He said, knock yourself out. So a week later, I came back and said, here's 4 different ideas. Don't focus so much on the ideas, but the thought behind them, because that's really the process. One was about the American farmer. Dylan was a champion of the American farmer with Farm Aid. So you could think like dilapidated barn, rusty plow. Park that. It's been done. It's not that ownable, but it fits. One had his handwritten lyrics to different songs that you'd know as a label, which is really eye-catching and kind of fun, but also felt almost obvious to kind of lean into music as the core element for the brand. And the third was his artwork. So his paintings and his metal sculptures that are, he calls gates, that are from found objects from farms and scrapyards. And I said, I think seeing Dylan through a different lens, one that people don't know about, this art, could be a fun place to play. And felt like that was inherently risky because if art is deeply personal when you're creating it. I made an ashtray for my mom in the 2nd grade that she threw away, but he came back and said, we love the art as an angle. And when do we start? That was a week from the first phone call. So I said, well, I think we've already started. Let's talk about the name. Bootleg whiskey is moonshine, unaged whiskey. And said, I don't think anyone's going to mistake a bottle at $50, $60, $100 as being moonshine, but maybe we can be more clever with how we use the name Bootleg. And if we do that as a limited release, that's a $500 bottle, no one's mistaking it as unaged whiskey. So that's our Bootleg collection. Our core collection, there are 4 main SKUs. We have a Tennessee bourbon, a Kentucky bourbon, a double barrel whiskey, and a rye. And then we do at least 2 limited releases in addition to Bootleg once a year. So that's how I got into the whiskey business, and keeps me busy.
So tell them a little bit more about your story, though, because again, you don't even just start there. You did a lot of other stuff. You were overseas for a while. You're in real estate. You have Atomic
Entertainment.
Atomic Entertainment. So give us a little background about that and a little bit about your family as well.
Okay. Well, I graduated college in '88. And in '89, I had taken a job with a real estate developer that said we should be looking at Eastern Europe. The winds were changing. It was clear that kind of communism was going to be coming to an end. The wall was falling. And I think officially the wall fell in October of '89. In January of '90, I was on an airplane to Warsaw, supposedly for 3 months of due diligence. It ended up being 10 years. I came back a few times. But I went over there to develop commercial office buildings. While I was there, it was apparent like they needed everything. It was exactly what you would imagine. People didn't have phones. Blue jeans were currency. You had family that sent food over. Shelves were empty. It was like a black and white movie when you're living there. And I had a lot of energy and wanted to do everything. And I remember calling back regularly to Chicago. I'm like, we should import fax machines and bananas. And they're literally, he's like, bananas? I'm like, they're crazy for bananas here because they never had them. And he's like, we are real estate developers. We are not banana importers, but love the idea. So about 4 years into my real estate development, in looking for a location for one of our tenants, this state-owned company, everything was still state-owned. They said, oh, we have a perfect space for your client. And took me down 3 levels below ground to this room, turned these lights on, and it was a bomb shelter. And this was supposed to be for a retail bank. And I didn't want to be rude and say, well, I don't think they want to be in a sub basement in a bomb shelter. But I do have a use for this if you're willing to rent it. So I rented this bomb shelter where the communists were going to survive the nuclear holocaust. It was 10,000 square feet. This is 4,000 in one round room with a 30-foot high dome ceiling, an open nightclub in Warsaw. And this was a side project.
You do this for your, okay, so this is a side project or for the company you work for?
This is a side project. I asked if it was okay if I invested in a bar. He said, as long as it doesn't mess up your day job, knock yourself out. So we called it Ground Zero. And this nightclub, it was shocking how much mattress money there was in Poland. There was no goods or services to buy. So if you had relatives sending you money, you didn't deposit at a bank, it was under your bed. And it wasn't easy to travel. So any kind of experience they could have was their escape. So the nightclub became this massive thing overnight. And we'd have 1,000, 2,000 people there on a given night. And I said, I think there's a demand in entertainment and media that is unmet here. And maybe I put the real estate shoes on the wall for a while and take a different path. So that led to doing a whole bunch of food and beverage businesses. I built big box retail with multiplex cinemas, bowling alleys, internet cafes, children's play centers, restaurants. Like, they needed everything. And if you had the time and the energy, which in your 20s we tend to have a little more of, there was always the next great thing. And I had blinked and a decade had gone by, and I'm like, there's always the next deal. I want to go back to Chicago. And so sold those businesses, went to Paris, because sometime in between, I had met my wife, who was living in Paris, moved there, had 3 kids in 4 years, and came back to Chicago in 2008.
Wow. Pretty impressive. So talk about when I hear that, you go into a bomb shelter and you say, basically overnight, I'll take it. This place, you said you're on a walk, I'll take it. Sign a lease tomorrow by noon. Right? There's a lot of betting on yourself, believing in yourself, and thinking big. Where does that come from?
That's a good question. My dad is an entrepreneur. His father was an entrepreneur. My grandfather. I remember in college, everyone stressing about sending out resumes as a senior to find a job, and we had the wall of rejection letters in our fraternity house. And I was like, I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do when I graduate. I'm not going to sweat it, but I assume I'm going to work for myself. And I thought I wanted to work in real estate. So I got my real estate license, realized I needed to get money to be able to eat. So I took a job as a broker, and the coincidence of taking that job was actually what opened the door to go to Eastern Europe. There was no hesitation to jump on an airplane and go, because what do you have when you're 21 years old? It's like, put my few things in a suitcase, and it was supposed to be a short-term trip, but when I was there, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be here a while.
Amazing. Talk about why. I think maybe Pete or somebody asked why you're doing it. The first time you said was easy. The second time was hard.
Why do it again? Yeah.
Right, do it again because you didn't have to.
There's a Dylan quote that I think is apropos. And he said, what do you do when you finally paint your masterpiece? You paint another. Heaven's Door Angel's Envy was a great success, and due in large part to the incredible talent of people that I was working with, and being at the right place at the right time. The desire to do it again was just that. It's like, can you do it again? And with the benefit of a little bit of knowledge, relationships, understanding the industry, felt like we could have a good run of having another successful brand. We started that without having Bob Dylan as a partner. That kind of fell into place relatively early in that whole process.
And I think, too, the betting on yourself, but also believing in yourself. So, I don't know if all of us would sit here and say, I'm just going to reach out to Bob Dylan, an icon, right, and in a week become his business partner. Talk about that thinking.
Maybe I would have had the gumption, but I'd done it once before and it worked. We had the nightclub. We said, let's do a television show because there's no television content, and we could have free advertising for our nightclub. American Bandstand. How hard can it be? You get some people dancing, you get, an MC, and we'll be publicized for free to the Polish world. There was a guy named Bob Geldof who did Live Aid, who was knighted for a lot of his important work. And Bob created a television company in the UK called Planet 24 Productions. So we needed to have a production partner, so I cold called him and said, would you like to do a show from a bomb shelter in Warsaw? And he's like, that sounds like small beer. I'm like, I never heard the term. He goes, it's peanuts in your parlance. Let's create a music television channel. And my partner's there, I'm like, covering the mic. He wants to do a television channel. He's like, say yes. Yes, we'll do a 24-hour music television channel. So basically, we copied MTV. We had kids that wanted to be VJs that would say, coming up next is Michael Jackson doing this video. And we went to all the major record labels and thinking, can we afford to pay for this stuff? In the first meeting with Sony, they said, we're in, but we want a 10-year agreement that you won't charge us for our videos. Like, what? Because in the US, they were getting charged to play the videos because seeing the videos on television sold records. So it's like, yeah, we will not charge you. We went to Pepsi and said, would you like to advertise? And they said, here's $1 million contract if you don't talk to Coke. And then we went to the distributors and they said, we'll take it because we have nothing to put on the air. So it was like, the environment created the circumstances where you could try something. It wasn't being brave, it was being lucky and seeing an opportunity.
How persistent were you?
I've become more persistent with time because in that environment, I don't think you needed to be terribly persistent. You could mess up. I think we didn't do a deal that wasn't upside down or stupid at some point, but you could course correct because there was no competition. I opened my first restaurant in Warsaw, and it was a Tex-Mex place. And you couldn't buy any ingredients, let alone Mexican spices and flavors. There was nothing. So we'd go back to the States and bring suitcases of Tabasco. We had to grow our own herbs. It was like, didn't think through the problem. Like, let's open a restaurant because we could all use Mexican food. And when we opened, it was the worst disaster that you could have. People were waiting for an hour and a half to get their food, and it came out terrible. And they would say, this is terrible, and can I get it to reservation tomorrow? So within a short period of time, we got better and better and better. And that restaurant ran for 20 some years. So we had the benefit of being in an environment where, yes, you needed to be a little bit brave, you needed to be a little bit persistent, but it was incredibly forgiving. So today, if you were to go there, it's caught up to the US. And if you were to open up something and you didn't know what you were doing, you'd get your legs blown off.
Talk about your passions now. Obviously, this, I'm assuming, would be a passion, but what are your other passions outside of the bourbon business today?
I love, well, you saw from the tour, I really love real estate and design. I think this is the funnest part of the project, is looking at a building and saying, what could it be? And trying to bring that vision to life. And I'd say borrowing heavily from other people's great ideas, but trying to also put your own touch on things.
Where do you do your most thinking? Like, do you write? Like, I'm a writer downer. Do you write all this stuff down and then let it come to life, or how does that work?
I have to write stuff down, and I've become, I don't know if you've ever used Pinterest, but it's like a crack addiction if you're a designer, because you click on one image that you like and 20 more appear, and you go down this rabbit hole. So everyone could be an amateur designer, at least on a board. But I've got 4 children. Doing stuff with my kids is my passion. Travel is a passion. I would say certainly design is way up there.
What's your wife think about all this?
She's incredibly creative as well. So she's very talented from a design perspective. She has great ideas. We collaborate on a number of things. She's classically trained harpist, pianist, and vocalist, so she has deep interest in music. And she works with me now in the spirits world. She also has a degree in finance. So she's incredibly talented left brain and right brain. And having her work with me is actually, most people are like, you're crazy. But if you're going to work 15 hours a day, it's good that your wife also is working 15 hours a day. But she enjoys what we're doing.
That's awesome. Any questions you all have? I don't want to hog the mic. Nothing? No other questions? All right, I think we're heading to the distiller.
Who wants to go drink?
Wait.
I mean, a lot of us are stymied by analysis paralysis, and it seems like are you a decisive person? And once you make a decision, you're like, that's where I'm going, or are you influenced by, what did I do? Should I pivot, or did you have a mentor helping you?
So the question real quick is, stymied by paralysis by analysis, or are you a decisive person and just make your decisions and go? Did you have a mentor, anything like that?
I guess I've had various mentors, not in a more formal sense, but people that I look up to or would go to for certain advice. I tend to be pretty left brain and right brain, so I would consider myself pretty numerate, because a lot of people who are creative aren't. And I will interrogate my own assumptions to death. That's the paralysis. As if you don't ask yourself what could go wrong, you're walking into a problem. So even on stuff like design, it changes on the fly a lot. Hopefully you're not ripping down 30-foot high bourbon walls because you want it moved 6 inches. Right. But pivoting on concept, to be successful in any business, you have to try to pivot quickly. And I think in a small company, that's one advantage that you have. We find that the majors aren't great at innovation. They're great at taking a brand that's broken through and then scaling it. Yep. And I think that comes from, in a big corporate environment, there are too many people that own it and don't want to change things, right? So I'm not afraid to say, yeah, that idea sucks. It was my idea. It sucks now. Okay, let's change it. And I like to have people around me that will challenge. I don't want to have people who agree. Poke holes in it. And sometimes, like 2 seconds after I say something, I'm like, actually, no, I think that's a really bad idea now that I've heard what you had to say. Right? So I wouldn't say paralysis is not a problem, but I change my mind frequently, and I'm not afraid to change it. I'm not afraid to say that was a bad idea.
Anything else? Okay. What should we expect when we go where we're getting ready to go?
If you've never been to a distillery on the Bourbon Trail, you'll love it. And if you've been to a bunch of it, you're going to love it even more. So we wanted a place that was not just about production. We knew it would make great whiskey, but something that really stood apart. And it had to somehow reflect the brand, Heaven's Door, and the ethos of Dylan. We were very fortunate to find this particular distillery. The gentleman who started it and ran out of money, which is when we came in, had a brilliant vision, and he built part American history tour and part craft bourbon distillery. So there are cabins that were taken from Philadelphia or outside of Pennsylvania that are from the 1700s that were taken apart piece by piece, moved and reassembled on the creek. There's a grist mill that the water turns that grinds the wheat. We've built open flame stills that a moonshiner would have used in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So you don't have to really care about seeing the modern production. You can kind of go walk back through time. And the land is absolutely striking. So it's beautiful. The liquid's great. You'll meet the entire team, our master distiller and his colleagues. Their passion for whiskey is unmatched. And even though this group is very knowledgeable, I'm sure everyone's going to walk away with a thing or two they've learned.
Sounds like we need to get out of here and go to the distillery. So thank you very much.
Let's get a drink on.
Let's go. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you. Everyone okay?
Yes.